Okay. So hello and welcome to virtual author coffee chat. I feel like I should like patent this now. And this is my series of amazing authors that all decided to blurb my book. And I just realized, oh, they're all amazing. So why don't I talk to them and open it up for other people to hear? And Sonya was actually the first person that said yes to that. And we've known each other for a few years, good few years now, mostly via the internet. And then we finally met in person last year, which was awesome. And yeah, and I've known about her books. I actually did a little talk with her about Supremely Tiny Acts, which is a wonderful book about a day, a memoir of a day. If she wants to talk about that, she can. But what we're mostly going to be talking about is Voice a Writer's Manifesto. Right on, is it on Voice or Voice? Just remind me.
Voice first.
Voice first. Okay. You can put it in the chat where people can read the actual like and which I love. It's an amazing manifesto about not just voice, because usually when you hear the word voice, it's like you think, oh, there's one voice. I have a voice and I'm supposed to find that voice. Instead, what she's doing is looking at the multiple voices we have and a lot of our exiled voices and our masked voices, and that's the word I use a lot now, or invisible voice, so it's about excavating those. So if you're a writer, I highly suggest this book. It doesn't matter whether you're beginning or middle or end writer, because there's stuff in there for everybody. There was for me anyway. So, and the book I wrote, of course, in case anyone here hasn't seen it yet, is The Mortality Shot, which is a hybrid collection of essays and stories and a stage text all about, guess what? Mortality. It's a really sneaky title. And so and as Sonya said in her blurb about it, it's got all these voices, right? So it's not like the easiest fit in the world to talk to Sonya, and there's a lot of things we have in common besides that. But this way of working from different points of view and seeing how voice shifts, which has been really amazing over time, based on where I'm at or you're at or any of you are at that are writers, and how to accommodate that and allow it. So that's important to me as somebody who also leads workshops and coaches writers, because I'm all about like getting people to get out of some cookie cutter idea. As one of the people in my workshop knows who's here, it's never about like write like so and so. It's about write like you, and that could mean multiple things, which is what Sonya is on about. So without further ado, Sonya, would you introduce yourself a little bit in terms of those ideas and the book, if you'd like to?
Definitely. So, hey everyone. And thank you, Julia. So nice to be here. Um, yeah, so the whole exploration with voices actually came out of another book that I had written, Pain Woman Takes Your Keys. And it was through the experience of developing chronic pain that I first really saw my voice shift. And then I named this new voice, which felt really different than my style. I named that voice Pain Woman, sort of just in jest. But then I began to name a bunch of different voices and to think about, how my own feeling like as an essayist, I didn't have a voice. I started to really challenge myself on that idea, and then to research and to say, what do writers all think about voice? And it led me kind of to find a bunch of different writers and scholars who believe in the idea of multivocality and the fact that, sort of the more you practice and write into your different voices, the more you discover. So that's kind of the big idea of Voice First, and it just has a bunch of different chapters, and my favorite part is a bunch of different writing prompts, which some of them are pretty odd, but that's what makes them fun. And yeah, and so and I had suggested tonight that I talk with Julia about especially the childhood voices in her book, because when I read it, it just those voices felt so complex and authentic to me, and they really stayed with me. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great. Me too. Yeah, I mean that, and it's funny because I'm not going to talk about it right now because I'll talk about it when we get to the sections where we're both reading about all the various things that went into there. Um, into that one of them in particular in the various voices that were coming in. But I also just think it's really interesting since you brought up the pain chronic, and I remember you said something about how like literally you were writing blog posts about it and that allowed you a certain kind of freedom and that then brought you to another place. And I think it's really interesting because of course, as anybody who knows me by now knows, I was recently, well, now it's not that recent, but like close to almost 2 years ago now, wow, diagnosed autistic. And so that's like, what? And it explained a lot. And I'm now looking at my writing from that perspective of like, oh, how, which comes from what part, and there's a lot of masks involved. And so I was thinking of the whole issue that I know you talk about invisible disability, right? Whether it's that or it's chronic pain or ADHD or, whatever kind of ways it manifests. Do you have anything you'd like to talk about that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think writing into the pain voice and writing about chronic pain, I mean, because I lead a lot of workshops, especially about writing the body and writing disability. I think many folks who are navigating the world with disabilities, we're often kind of overwhelmed with other people's reactions to us. And so that feels like this big wave that we're constantly sorting through. And for me, being able to discover the ways in which disability and pain have affected my voice, but also the ways in which I've been pushed to express myself in new ways has been really cool. And it's also really kind of given me an additional layer of appreciation for how I've adapted over time. So it's nice now in retrospect. I mean, my diagnosis was about a decade ago, is to really see how I have what I feel like is a lot of space right now to express myself, at least on that issue. And then, that sort of playing with voices over time, I think then makes it easier for me to write about other things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know if you went through this a decade ago, but I'm just going through this really weird like reframe of like, wait, I'm disabled. Like, it's just like and that kind of that whole idea of the twice exceptional, it's both gifted and disabled, hooray. And just like that there's just all those weird labels, right? Whether I believe in them or not. And that's a whole other thing I'll talk about. But like, just the ways that that happens. And I've now, I think, worked through it. But at first, I was really like smack up against my own ableism, which is
Totally,
profound.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
And does that feel like to me the biggest gift is that, like, that it smacked me upside the head of that?
Mhm.
And that's like, oh, wait a minute. Like, hold
Totally.
on, hold the phone. I need to see the world in a totally different way than I ever used to see it. Because, I don't know if
Yeah, it's
that
like a whole
been.
new world is revealed, and then you realize how before how much ableism had kind of limited, at least in my case, I felt like I'd been seeing such a limited view of the world, right? So I have just endless gratitude for all the disabled writers and scholars and activists who were there when I needed them and still are. It's a great community.
It's an amazing community, and it feels like it feels like the wardrobe in C.S. Lewis. It's like you open up this little thing, you think it's gonna be a dark closet, and it's like, it's like this amazing, colorful world of all these people that are wandering around thinking really amazing stuff and writing in really interesting ways. And like, where, what? Like, it is completely the opposite of what I thought I was gonna walk into. And so yeah, so I think that's fascinating. And it is, to me, the gift also is now things I think and the other thing I realized to not do is like the whole pity thing and all of that kind of stuff. I think I knee jerk went into it. I'm like, oh God, it's awful, and just realizing you've got people who are full people and communicating on different levels in different ways. And I'm now very suspicious of intelligence, kind of meters or whatever, all of that. I'm like, I'll bet those are wrong,
Yeah,
and just like
totally.
all of that stuff that I used to be like, I'm so smart, and it's like, and also like, what does that even mean? And who cares? And
Mhm.
and if somebody can't speak, like there's a lot of autistic people who can't speak for one reason or
Right.
another or have selective mutism. But now, thanks to these different technologies, people see that, oh, these people actually understand what's going on and they can communicate now. And it's like, so the idea was they couldn't speak, so they were stupid, and
Mhm.
so it makes you wonder like how many other ways am I thinking people aren't all there or am not just because I don't understand the way that person needs to communicate.
Right. Yeah, I was just reading for a blurb tonight, a book manuscript by one of my students who communicates via, a screen and assisted technology. But she's
Wow.
someone who, without having access to that, wouldn't be able to write and wouldn't be able to craft narrative.
Right, and would be considered less than human as a
Yep.
consequence. And then the irony is that in the autistic world, you may or may not know this, if you can find a way to communicate, either because you can be hyperlexic like me or whatever, but that there's all the various ways that manifests, then you're considered not really autistic because you can communicate. So it's like this. So
Oh,
that's the way the
wow.
people from the outside are like, oh, well, you're not really autistic because if you
Hmm.
were really autistic, you couldn't communicate and you'd just be hitting your head against a wall or something like that. There's this idea that that's real autism and this is fake autism, which is like,
Right.
well, that's convenient. So you're basically saying the definition of autism is you can't understand somebody,
Right. And these
which is
false binaries we put people in, you're either this or you're that, right? And no one
right,
else
which
can
is
judge.
right. And so again, I think of that with voice, and I'm so glad you got that student, and glad she has you. So anyway, before we go too long, do you want to read? Would you be willing to read part of your wonderful book and show
Definitely.
the actual cover that I don't have because I have it on?
This is me. I
Yay.
put stickers all over my book covers because otherwise I forget which ones are mine. So anyway. All right, so I'm going to read a couple short sections from the chapter on voices in time and place, on childhood voices. Getting to know your own voice lets you see what you're working with, what you're made of, and why you express yourself the way you do. This can help make you this can help you make more conscious choices on the page. Writers and teachers Linda Trichter Metcalf and Tobin Simon write, to be a writer, and especially to write out of your own life, you must be imaginative about what it's like to be you. It's not enough to spill words, even intriguing or provocative words, onto the page. Writers have to penetrate experience. Listening for our own voices and the influences that shape them can also provide us with greater confidence in using our voices in person and on the page. Our voices can also tell us things about ourselves that we'd rather not hear or that delight us, perhaps things that we have never appreciated about ourselves and our communities. Pat Schneider, in Writing Alone and with Others, describes the voice of childhood as an original voice. And Peter Elbow, composition theorist, he's my dude. I love his work. Peter Elbow describes it as one of our mother tongues. Schneider talks about the long process of learning to value the voice she grew up with in the Ozarks, a voice with accents, sentence structures, and pronunciations that teachers and other writers tried to edit out as not sounding professional enough. Quote, "We have too often been trained to distrust our original voices," Schneider writes. She quotes novelist Amy Tan, whose essay Mother Tongue is about writing stories, quote, "using all the Englishes I grew up with," end quote, including the mix of Chinese and English spoken by her mother, which to Tan's ears was not broken English, but contained, quote, her passions, her intent, her imagery, the rhythms of her speech, and the nature of her thoughts. Award-winning fiction writer, and also nonfiction writer, Jacqueline Woodson writes, quote, people tend to block out what was unpleasant about their childhoods, but I don't. I never left the mind of a young person, and I remember who I was and what I wanted as a child. I remember how I spoke. So when I write, I pay attention to cadence and what's left unsaid. Along with memory, authors writing for young people need to know and care about the world their characters live in so they can see the meaning in young people's dialogue, no matter how staccato or hesitant it is, or how few words they use. There's no magic formula for that, end quote. Reading young adult literature is a great way to recapture the voice of childhood, and many writers who focus on adult audiences also choose to narrate some or all of a book from a child's perspective. It can be a challenge to drop into a kid voice and get it right the first time, so it's better to work up to it, to think about yourself at different ages, and to try and write from a child's or teen's voice using moments that evoke emotion, both positive and negative. Children aren't simple beings, and a child or teen's voice has as much, if not more, emotional range and expression than that of most adults. At one point, when I was stuck with a draft of a memoir, I wrote a version in my preteen voice. The narrator, wanting to solve the world's problems, who had not yet encountered the full weight of sexism and other forces that wanted to still my voices. I then tried to rewrite the book with more confidence and energy than my previous drafts had contained. So the prompts that I have at the end of this section just say, what was your most confident voice from childhood? Your most frightened? What were some of the voices you used as a teen? Since this is such a period of growth and change, you might even have been trying on multiple voices in each of your preteen and teen years, searching for what felt right. And I just, as I was reading this, just makes me think of one of the things that I was really attracted to in your book, Julia, was, you know, sometimes I'll read an adult's recreation of a child's voice and it sounds too saccharine and sweet, and it kind of freaks me out. Like, it just, like, childhood isn't like that. It's not sweet, you know.
No.
At least my perspective. And so, you know, when I just felt like such space in reading your child narrators, because you were treating those voices as three-dimensional and as real complex people. So yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'll read an example of one in case people are wondering, but I just wanted to say about what you read first before I go launch into that, is that that whole idea of voices is really important that get taken away. And I had this experience of you know, I had this opportunity and I got a scholarship to go to a private school starting in 8th grade, and then I went to a boarding school in 10th grade, and in some ways it was great. I had amazing teachers. I learned a lot. It was incredible. But where the trauma was with my writing. And in fact, you know, and it was considered that my writing, quote, got a lot better, unquote. But what happened was I lost all my sense of freedom with it. And I had a, you know, teacher here, a teacher there that would try to help with that. But it was incredible because I was suddenly like with these really rich people who, you know, I think were born with a New Yorker in their hand or something. And like I hadn't been. And you know, I grew up with some amazing people and some really, but it's just not that particular kind of thing. And so I felt really intimidated, and I'd get these, you know, I mean, not mean comments back, and you know, there's just their teachers used to getting papers from kids who've been in private school since they were born, you know, so they'd be like, well, there's this and that, and like I'd say, you know, I'd say something like, needless to say, and then my English teacher would say, then why say you know, and things like that, which is actually pretty funny. But I was horrified by it because I was like, oh my God, because I was supposed to be a good writer, you know, so like, it's not that you should never teach a kid craft or whatever, and not, to be clear what I'm saying, I don't think they were mean or horrible people. It was just this way it hit me was just like, oh no, and I felt like I had to craft this identity that was, I called it rich person drag, and learn this kind of like, well, it's got to be this, but but it's got to be insouciant, but it's got to look like this, but it's got to, there's like a whole thing that you were supposed to do, and I, initially wasn't doing it, and I was panicked about it. So there's that. However, ironically, in ninth grade, I wrote, and this is back to you, the child voice. I wrote a short story, a Christmas short story, in the point of view of a little kid at Christmas time. So from my old journals, like I was only 14, so I wasn't that old at that point. I was like going back to when I was 7, and I had these dire, and so I would use that voice, and it won this award, and it got published in the paper. So going back to that voice, and it wasn't saccharine even then. And a matter of fact, that's what my teacher loved about it. He's like, this is very sweet, but it's not saccharine, because it was this little kid going into a nursing home, and the smells were weird, and didn't understand why they were there. And it was like the band was playing. They were supposed to talk to somebody, and they were just freaked out. The kid just freaked, but like writing it in kid voice, And so, uh, yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting based on what you just said, that like the one time I reached back to my
Right.
actual voice is where, and then it took me after that, uh, let's see, I was 14. So it took me 20 something years later that I was able to find it. I was that for any attempts at writing before, it was all trying to be that person, this
No,
idea of,
I definitely had the same experience of about 20 years where voice was out there and I was trying to write to sort of cover up something or to show people that I was smart in a certain way that looked like how other people's writing looked. And yeah, and so there's research actually in other parts of voice first where that period of adolescence where I think particularly girls and non-binary people are being sort of edited down
mhm.
from the outside in so many ways overlaps with the disappearance of access to our full voices, which then um, inhibits young people's ability to even know the world, right? Because if you can't express yourself, you can't really engage with making knowledge or meaning. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
really it's a horrible gap to have to experience.
Yeah, and then of course, if you have some invisible disability and you don't even know about it, in my case being autistic, it's like everything I said, or whenever I said anything from, what the kids these days call your authentic self, it was not usually well received, because it was usually like, I call it honesty Tourette's, which makes my autistic therapist laugh, because it's like it was just this stuff would pop out of me, and people are like, oh, no, you're not supposed to say that, just, or at least not like that, and also my facial expressions never matched my emotions. So people would be like, you look really angry. I'm like, I'm actually happy. And then nobody believed me. They actually thought I was making it up, and it's like, no, I'm not delusional. I just wish I could have said I was autistic, but I couldn't, because that would have been a thing. So, I'm gonna now read instead of babbling on, if that's okay. So, because you said such kind things. I'm going to read from Red Hots, and some of you have been here for a while, might have heard it, you read it before, but some of you haven't. So this short story, and this is what's interesting to me about it, is it's definitely getting into the child voice, like you were talking about, but also I wrote it it was literally right before COVID hit, and I had just begun going to meetings for women who were or thought they might be autistic. And I was really understanding, like, oh, this isn't just some weird fancy thing, some weirdness on my part. I actually identify with all of these women. So I was also kind of trying to feel into that. And obviously not saying autism because nobody knew and I didn't know, so it wouldn't have made any sense, but just the sensory experience of that. So, and the mental experience. So anyway, and it started with a very distinct memory of mine, and so this is one of those auto fiction type things, really. I mean, it's not all exactly true, but it's a compilation of a couple different things, but it was a very, very specific memory that it begins with. Denise has the red hots. She doles them out one at a time. One for me, then one for her, and then we eat them and make squinchy faces, and then she doles them out again. I am over her house, and we're sitting on her bed, which has no sheets and an itchy blanket cover thing with faded flowers on it that is kind of beaten up and stringy. I always wondered why Denise had big, dark circles under her eyes. She always looked tired, and her brown eyes seemed like sad dog eyes, like those paintings you see on sale at Bradley's with the black velvet background. That is when she doesn't have scared bunny eyes, the way the baby rabbits look out back when the cat chases them. And sometimes Denise's eyes are both at the same time. I like Denise. She's usually so quiet and barely ever says anything to anyone at school, so I was surprised when she asked me over. We had never talked. I mean, no one ever talks to me, so it was a real surprise. I'm still the new kid, plus I have the wrong clothes again. Mommy moves us around a lot, usually when there's a new man she's married, and I'm never dressed right for where we are. I have to wear big, clunky red rubber boots, not the knee-high zip-up leather boots the other girls get with the smooth soles so they can slide on the ice. And I have a practical winter navy coat that's boring, not like the flowery, colorful maxi coats the other girls have with fake fur linings. So they all look like Carole King, who has a new album out called Tapestry that they bring to school and show each other, even though there's no record player at school. So it's stupid. But they get their mommies to curl their hair and look like Carole King. I do not look like Carole King, and neither does Denise. But Denise does have pretty long, pretty brown hair that's a little stringy, but that she tries to pull back with plastic barrettes. Mommy gets mine cut into a page boy because she doesn't like brushing it because I whine too much when she gets to the snarls. Denise just has the snarls and long hair. I think she's pretty. Mommy tells me I would slip and fall in the boots like the other girls have, and I need the rubber soles of the red boots. Maybe I would, but the other girls have so much fun gliding on the ice over puddles in the playground. When I try to slide, I can't, so I just stand there looking stupid. I did try to lick the monkey bars like some of them, but my tongue got stuck and I had to rip it off and it was bleeding, which was gross. The other girls ran away giggling. Denise stayed behind and asked if I was okay. That's when she invited me over. I was so grateful I said yes. Mommy says I am special and shy, and that is why I don't fit in. Denise doesn't have any boots, only penny loafers that don't fit right, like someone older gave them to her. She doesn't have any socks on either, so she must be freezing. I'm about to ask her why she doesn't have any socks on, but I see the scared bunny eyes and don't. Her cloth coat looks old too, and its sleeves are raggedy. Carole King has bare feet on the album cover, and her jeans look old, but she's inside. When we're sucking on our red hots, I get the feeling these might be dinner. There aren't any visible parents around and just the one light bulb covered by a crooked shade. I don't ask her where her parents are, but I can tell she's waiting for someone. I know because I've spent many days and hours waiting for my daddy to pick me up to take me to his apartment in Hartford with his new wife, Lily, who is really pretty and skinny and has dark hair down to her butt and has a suede bag with fringe, and she looks more like Carole King than anyone and wears sandals even in the winter. But he forgets a lot to pick me up. So I know that feeling, and it's the worst feeling. And you feel like no one will ever want to see you ever again. And like you'd rather just be buried in a hole and die. And Denise looks that way now. So no way am I asking her why. Every time we hear a car drive up her street, she looks up. But then when the headlights pass by, her shoulders slump a little more. I now wonder why mommy didn't even check if Denise's mommy was here when she dropped me off. I guess she just thought Denise wouldn't be alone. But also, I'm home alone a lot, so maybe she doesn't think it matters. Mommy is so happy I finally have a friend, so maybe that's why she hasn't asked me any questions about her. But now I think about it, there was no car in Denise's driveway. That should have been a tip off. Denise wants to say something, I think, or maybe I do, but instead we just look at each other, then look away. Neither of us says anything when the next car goes by and it's just getting darker and darker. Denise asks if I want to watch television. There's a small black and white TV in the corner with a broken antenna. I nod. Mostly there's just static, but we can see ABC a little and it's showing a dumb movie. But I'm hungry and it's better than nothing. Denise smiles with the scared rabbit look so I don't ask about food. I'm hoping maybe she'll bring it up. I kind of want to go home, even though that would mean to mommy and Roger smoking pot and laughing at nothing I understand and sometimes at me, but at least I have sheets. My skin is sensitive, so the blanket's itchy, even through my bell bottoms. There are no pillows, so I don't need to worry about the feathers. I'm allergic. I get itchy bumps on my neck if I sleep on a feather pillow. The stupid movie ends. It was about a woman who's impressed by a man, so she leaves her life to live with him. I hate these shows. Most shows are like this, though. I guess girls aren't meant to have lives, just somehow become part of a man's life. It doesn't seem fair, but mommy does that all the time. That's why we move so much. When the ad comes on for an Elvis Presley record you have to order before midnight tonight, I finally do ask Denise if her parents are around anywhere. I had a friend when we lived in New Hampshire last winter named Brenda, and her mommy got migraines and would stay in a room alone in the dark for days. So I'm hoping maybe Denise has one of those. But Denise just shrugs and looks away. It's okay, I say, pretending it's okay, but decide it's time to ask about food because my tummy is making weird sounds. Can we raid the refrigerator? She looks at me with the bunny eyes again, so I don't ask about dinner, and instead we each eat another red hot. I am thirsty after, and my throat is hot, and I have to pee, but I'm too scared because Denise seems so scared to even ask where the bathroom is. She shows me her doll, though. It's an old chatty Cathy doll, but the string is broken, so she doesn't say anything, and the dress is ratty, and the hair that is still on her plastic head doesn't even have its ribbon. No one has chatty Cathys anymore. Denise says, "This is Flossie." So I say, "Oh." And then she goes, "Flossie has a home in Paris and New York, and someday she'll take me there." And her eyes are dancing happy with a flash of light that's new, and her cheeks get a little red even. I want to say something to go along with this, but the doll has lost an eye too and has no shoes, and it makes me sad. "Do you have a doll?" Denise asked me, smiling for the first time, enough that I see her teeth are a little yellow. I say yes, but not that I also have a lot of stuffed animals and even a couple Barbies. But now I wish I'd brought them so we could play. And also, I can't really sleep without all my stuffed animals in a row next to me, never mind without sheets. But I just feel kind of guilty and spoiled now when all Denise has is a broken chatty Cathy doll and it makes her so happy. I can't believe she isn't hungry too, but we just get under the itchy blanket on the sticky, scratchy mattress that I see now has brown stains to go to sleep. I can't stop scratching myself, but try to do it quietly. I don't want Denise to feel bad. Denise leaves on the light, and so I notice she has little bright red bumps on her legs. There's a smell of the dog of a dog in the house, but no dog. I wonder why I didn't invite Denise over my house. But Roger and Mommy have books in the living room with naked people in them about how to have sex and also about growing marijuana, and I don't want any kids to see this. We get pamphlets at school from the government with stick figure drawings of adults getting arrested for having drugs. So I don't want anyone there to know there are drugs in our house. And the naked people are just embarrassing. In the pamphlets, the little stick figure kids watching the adults get arrested become wards of the state. And I don't want to be a ward of the state. That's what they call it, which is why I know already I'm not telling anyone, not even Mommy, about Denise not having any parents here tonight, because there's only one thing worse than bad parents or being alone and only having red hots for dinner, and that is being a ward of the state. Everyone knows that. I had a babysitter once who was crazy and said she would threaten to tell people about Mommy and Roger having drugs, and so I would become a ward of the state unless I let her adopt me. But I didn't let her adopt me. But she was so scary and also said I was evil, so it was confusing. Why are the people who say they want to help so scary usually? I can't sleep, but Denise does. And then she starts dreaming and saying stuff that doesn't make sense. Her face is in a knot and her eyelids are quivering and one arm is twitching like she wants to lift it but can't. And I can't tell exactly what the words are, but I get scared and wake her up and then she holds me really tight. I don't know if she's really awake or asleep, so I just let her. And I don't know what to do but look at the ceiling and the patterns of the passing cars' headlights, the patterns the passing cars' headlights make when they drive by. And I want to cry, but I don't. I just feel like a giant hole opening up inside me that feels like it might suck me into it and suffocate or squish me to death or just make me disappear. I'm so glad when I wake up and there's the gray blue light of right before morning. Denise is sleeping at the way other side of the mattress. I must have fallen asleep, but don't know how or when. I'm so hungry and thirsty and I have to pee so bad. I'm glad to see I didn't pee the bed. I get up and walk down the skinny hall with the sticky, dirty carpet and find the bathroom after trying to open a door that wouldn't, but then the next one did. There's a grown-up's robe hanging off the door. It looks like a man's robe, faded plaid. I don't see a lady's robe anywhere. The toilet handle doesn't work right, so after I flush, it won't stop flushing. Denise comes in, her face all squished red with the shape of the mattress bumps and her hair all over the place, and jiggles it until it stops. I say, let's go over to the Howlands and look for change outside near the dumpsters in the back parking lot, and she agrees. I never took off my clothes and my mouth tastes like a musty cotton ball, but I want to get out of this creepy house. And if we find enough change, we can buy candy bars and maybe a soda. I don't know how far away we are from the Howlands at Denise's house, but it's close to where I live, so I'm hoping we can walk. But as we're walking, sometimes on a bumpy sidewalk and sometimes on the road with cars whipping by us when there's no sidewalk, I realize I have no idea where we're going. I don't know if Denise does either. In the cracks of the sidewalk, there are tough little plants with pointy leaves growing out of them, even now in February. Some sidewalks are bulging with the roots of trees underneath, and some are cracked open by them. Where I live with Mommy and Roger, in the upstairs of a house owned by the lady downstairs, is across from the back parking lot of the Howlands and Friendlies. There's no sidewalk at all, just scrubby grass on a mound with dirt and sometimes some dandelions. When I finally look up from the sidewalk where I was keeping my eyes peeled for change and was about to pick up what I thought was a nickel, but instead was a silvery bottle cap, I see the Stop and Shop sign up ahead, past a grassy triangle outlined by a curb with lots of traffic lights where a bunch of roads all collide. And now I know we're on the opposite side of town from where I live. Mommy says I have a bad sense of direction. But at least in where the Stop and Shop is, there's also a Bradley's and a Pier 1 and a movie theater, and it's like an L, not just a couple stores in a row. So there'll probably be lots of change we can find on the sidewalks and in the parking lot, maybe enough to even get some real food. Usually when I'm looking for change near the dumpsters, it's just for something extra, or to ride the electric rocking horse in front of the drugstore, or sometimes I pretend I'm an orphan or an explorer. But this time I'm actually starving. I want to rush to make the lights so we can cross the two big streets to get to the shopping center, but Denise has been walking slowly behind me. I want to yell at her to speed up, but I don't because I don't want to ruin my only friendship. But I think she knows I'm angry because every time I look back at her, she flinches like someone might hit her. Then I realize she thinks that someone is me and I want to die. Somehow, though, I manage to get across the first road when there's a minute without a car racing by and get onto the traffic triangle. I hope Denise is following. I climb up onto the mound of dirt and grass and turn around just in time to see her trip over the curb and fall down. I run back down and pick her up and over the curb onto the mound before another car whooshes by honking its horn. There's dirt on her face and a small cut on her forehead where a piece of broken glass from a beer bottle must have scratched her when she fell. I find a crumpled up piece of tissue in my coat pocket and try to stop the bleeding. The blood on the tissue makes a deep red blob that scares me a little. Denise is still kneeling and looks at me so gratefully, I want to hit her. Maybe my crazy babysitter was right and I am evil. I start to cry. Denise puts her dirty hand up to the tissue and holds it on her forehead. She stands up and with her other arm, she holds me tight to her. There, she says, sounding like someone's nice Nana on a TV show. There, you'll be okay. And I just start bawling like a baby. Some older kids drive by in a car and yell out, "Leslie's." I don't know what that means, but they laugh meanly, and one of the guys with really short hair throws a bottle at us. He looks like he could be the older brother of this kid, Kevin, who's fat and whose face is always red and sweaty and says to me every day, "Hey, you kid, I'm gonna punch your guts out." Denise and her old coat smell musty like a house that hasn't been cleaned, but I don't want to move away from her. I look for another tissue, but instead find two red hots from last night that I stashed in my pocket. I put one in my mouth to stop from crying, and it works. And I give the other one to Denise. She must be freezing because her coat is so thin and she still has no socks. So I hold her this time and feel her shoulders moving up and down like she's crying, but there is no sound. Then she is still and moves away from me and opens her mouth and fans herself like the red hot is burning her throat. I see her tongue and lips are bright red from the candy. So I open my mouth and ask her if my tongue is bright red too. She says yes. So we stick our tongues out at each other and laugh. And then we turn away from each other into the cars waiting for the lights to change and stick out our tongues at them and we laugh. I'm crying again now, and so is Denise, but it's different because it's from the laughing. Ah,
Oh, that was so great. Yay.
thank you.
Uh,
Thanks.
I love that so much. It's so vividly recreated. It totally reminds me of the quote from what I read about like child's voice should really penetrate experience. And I just was wondering if I could ask, like, what was the process of writing that?
I woke up at 2:30 in the morning and remembering basically the opening scene is completely accurate. There are different things around that that aren't, but that and I just remembered it really well, and it was something I'd always wanted to write about and didn't know how, and I just couldn't sleep. So I got up and I found, I don't know where it is right now, one of my books. I've got all these journals, and I know you do too. And I just hand wrote it out in one go. I mean, I edited it later, but I just wrote it, just all came out like a whoosh, which is how most of my writing comes out, to be perfectly honest with you. And then I edit, but there's a big whoosh part, you know. And it just happened. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it just did. And it was that voice, you know, it was the voice and the memory, and also just, you know, one of the things, nobody knew I was autistic, but I was always considered really sensitive, all the sensory stuff. And then also there's two kinds of autism, more than two, but there's a big sort of dividing line between autistic people who appear to have no empathy, and I'm still wondering whether that's true or not. But there's another one which is hyper empathetic, which is the kind of people that just really feel and see exactly what's happening. And that's my variety. And it's like overwhelming at times. That's why being around people is overwhelming, because it's like, okay, I'm seeing everything from your point of view. So, you know, I can't stop it. So that was also that, you know, just that kind of remembering what that was like, and in that feeling. And I always felt that way. Like, we didn't have a lot of money, but whenever there was people, you know, I was always aware there were poorer people, and I was like, I should be grateful because, you know, that you know, which is not a bad thing, by the way, but still, it's just like that. So that sense, and this girl, there was a girl like her, and just that. So yeah, so it was just extrapolating from that, and then it conflated it with another friend of mine and some things we did. So it was kind of conflating the two, you know, really weirdo other kids that became friends of mine. Uh, yeah,
That's
so that's
wonderful.
what happened. And that's one of the things that's nice about fiction, is that you can do that, right? Like, you can,
Mhm.
but I think I was honest to the experience, which is probably why it feels, I hope it's why it feels uh penetrating, as you said.
Yeah. Well, and it has to be too, like, you know, that something that's seen as a deficit, like hyper empathy, is actually an incredible asset, both, you know, for humankind, but for the writing. You recreate the sort of agony of watching this friend and her discomfort and her, like, you know, being abandoned by adults in her lives. And it's just really, yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah, and also that kind of empathy that comes from, you know, knowing some parts of that, you know, and having, you know, just that interesting way that even as kids find each other. You know, this is what I realized over time. It's like they don't necessarily definitely at that age don't sit around and talk about it, but you just find the other kids, like, you just find each other,
Hmm.
um, one way or the other. And she was a really, really lovely person. Yeah. And I always wondered what happened to her. So, you know, because we moved again, you know, so it's like, I don't know. So, you know, that's one of so that's the other part of it too, because we moved a lot, is bringing these things. It's like putting my life together in pieces, like just
Mm.
this memories, or that's it. I wrote down my memories once. It's not something I expected for anyone to read, but I wrote down all my memories and the political scene all the way till I was 17. One year, I spent a whole year doing that. And I said to people who asked why I was doing it, I said, my memories are my hometown.
Wow.
I don't have a hometown. I just have my memories.
Hmm.
So I don't want to lose them.
Right. Right.
Mm. Hmm.
Should we see if there's questions or other reactions.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We can do
Awesome.
that a little early because there's a lot of folks here. Oh my God, Glenn's got
Is
the
that Carol
tapestry
King?
out. Of course he
Oh
does.
my gosh.
I do too. I have it somewhere up there. I got it. I've got all my records still. So
I
yeah.
totally
Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say I'm old enough to remember that when people would bring like LPs to school, and as you said in that reading, like there's no record player. People were just like, yeah, just gonna put
Uh,
this on my desk. Here's my
oh
Led
yeah.
Zeppelin.
Yeah, no, it was totally the thing. It was totally the thing to do. So I just want to tell folks, I just made it possible for you to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question or if, okay, Glenn, what's up?
It's funny because like this past week, just I've been going places and been hearing songs from that record just kind of at random and thinking about that story too. And yeah, what you said about like moving away, like that's how you didn't know this girl anymore. Like it was just obvious from reading it that of course you didn't stay in touch. This was just like a little slice of your life with this person, very tense and just made such an impression. But yeah, it's kind of clear that you moved on and you don't know what happened to her. Yeah, so moving, really powerful story.
Thanks, Glenn. It's interesting that you could tell that, but that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and
Any
I'll say
other?
what's so
Yeah.
interesting about like, you saying that your hometown is just your memories, and especially having moved around a lot. I think that I found too, like, especially as a kid, that kid voices are so connected to places. Um, I think because kids are closer to the ground and like just like observant in that way of like exploring, but also asking themselves sometimes difficult questions about the way the world works, and not having the sort of denial and pat answers that adults often use, right? And so yeah, the two things of the childhood voice, so the voice in time for me is really connected to place. So
That's interesting. And also I was thinking about it in terms of this, and I think I've certainly read other people who do this as well, but is that the voice is talking to someone, and like honestly when I was growing up at the time I had no one to talk to. Like these thoughts went nowhere. They were just inside, and I certainly didn't write them for my teachers, and I didn't write them, and I didn't say them out loud, and I didn't know where they went. Right, it's like that I love that line from Joe Didion. She's talking about objects for which there's no satisfactory solution.
mm,
And it's like that's in my case it was these thoughts and these feelings, and just that I'm sure most kids go through this, some version of this, of just not knowing where to put them. And so to write it now is also really cool because it's kind of like giving that kid a voice in
mhm,
retrospect. And also, the sensory issues I mentioned are in there. And also the other thing about autistic people, and again, I think this might be true of kids in general as well, but definitely autistic, is you just notice all these tiny little things, like
mm,
just constantly, like all the smells, all the looks, all the light, and I remember really well, like where we lived, like there was this kind of street that went by, and I remember just staring up at the headlights going back and forth, just like that kind of thing of just really paying attention to these kind of patterns that aren't things you necessarily notice,
mm,
maybe when you're older. I don't know.
mm.
Too. Mm. But actually, that's the other thing about being autistic, is that your synapses don't pare down. So like you have the same
Oh,
synapses you
cool.
do as a kid. So like and now they're beginning to realize they don't necessarily pare down, but they kind of go dormant. Like in other words, so let's say you grow up in a big vast woodland and you get used to taking certain paths. Well, then those become the paths you take, and then you're not really that connected to all the other things because they're not necessary. And autistic people don't do that. So that's the reason why I think we see all the patterns people don't see, but it's also why sometimes it's like, there are too many paths,
Right. But yeah, you would imagine that for writing, right? And being able to continue to access all of that level of awareness is amazing.
Yeah. And how have you, I just, because you're here too, and I want to hear you. How have you written from a child point of view? I'm not sure. I don't think I've read anything of yours, or have you used that yourself, or
I have I've written, I have a collection coming out this fall from Belt Press. Woohoo! And it's called Love and Industry, a Midwestern Workbook. So that should be out in September. But it has like a lot of my like late, I would say teenage voices. So like from
Nice.
13 up to like, through college and yeah, and a lot of like dealing with depression and not knowing that's what it was, but also like, just trying to figure out feelings in the midst of a kind of wild family situation that didn't make any sense at times. And yeah, and some of that writing, I think at first, we were talking before this started about region. And so I have this my first academic job interview. I go into this hotel room for some MLA academic hiring committee, and I had turned in a piece that was, from my childhood. And this guy looked me up and down, and I was in my little suit, whatever, and he said, "Oh, I expected somebody more Reba McEntire." Oh, that I laughed, but it was also like so painful. Like, what are you talking about? Like I don't know what, it just was one of those things that's been rumbling around in the dryer of my head for the past 3 decades. It's just like, and so, I think I also tended to dismiss some of those experiences because when I went away to college and shared, oh, here's a little bit of our story that happened to me, and people's reactions seemed so out of scale. Like, oh, that's so wild and crazy. Like, no, it's not, so I think that for me was a lot of why that's was some of the earliest stuff I wrote, but it's stuff that is only getting really out there now because I had a long period of being afraid of other people's judgments, or sifting back and trying to see like, oh, this matters and there's nothing to be ashamed of, so yeah. But yeah, so that's been a very recent, a sort of recent retrieval.
I'm really glad though. I'm really glad of that. Laura, yeah, what's up?
I had a comment and then also a question. Listening to you read, Julia, it just made me think about how I was so out of touch with what kids actually sound like for a long time because I don't have kids, and I wasn't around a lot of kids for a very long time. And then I moved to where I live now, and a couple of years ago, and I have in a townhouse complex, and we have adjoining gates, and there's a 7-year-old, well, now she's 8, or no, she's 9, next door. And so, I would just be sitting out in my, like, weeding my little garden patch, and she'd come through the gate, and I would just sit there and go like, this is whack. Like this, like the because she'd be all over the place, like the whole, like, and then and Carol King tapestry, and then like off on like the tangents and all that stuff. And it's just like the conversation is so non-linear, right? And it's just like, so anyway, so it just kind of made me laugh because that was, I think I just realized it's like, yeah, that's really been an eye-opener for me, sitting and listening to my little neighbor go on. But then I was going to ask too, back to earlier comments about learning how to access or to contemplate voices when something is new to you. Because yeah, like this has been my situation also for the past few years. I had one diagnosis in 2018. I had another diagnosis in 2021, of things that, you know, I'm like, I'm 54 and like, you know, how is it that I'm just figuring this stuff out now? So all of a sudden, yeah, pondering who these voices are or who these people are as part of me and the voices that come with them. So I don't know. So yeah, if you could speak to how you have been doing that as you learn, I guess it's like learning big truths about, or big things about yourself when you think you're probably past that and you're going to coast for the rest of your
Well, I definitely did not think I was. Oh, sorry, Sonia, do you want to answer that first? Oh, okay. Sorry. I was just going to say, like, I was 57 when I got my autism diagnosis. So I super relate to this. And my first impulse was, oh, I'll just take the memoir I was writing about yoga and trauma and I'll just jam that into it somehow. Like, you know, so that was my first instinct, was like, this is going to take me like 3 seconds to absorb, and you know what, wrong. Like that was like just okay, spoilers, didn't work, you know. And so I've had to really spend some time absorbing all of this. And I'll just say, in my experience, and it isn't everyone's, but there's a lot of people I know that are late diagnosed autistic as it is, it's been the biggest liberation ever, because it's like, it's, you know, I finally feel like I'm on the ground. You know, I feel like all the work I did before. I mean, the one difference I might have from you is I never thought I was coasting, because I've always been like, okay, you know, I'm in recovery and I'm sober and I've got to do the yoga, and now I'm doing the yoga training and now I'm trying to work through the trauma. You know, it's just like, and I was
that was a
constantly
joke
like
too, because
throwing stuff.
there's no coasting.
Yeah, no, so I never felt like I was coasting, but like but I always felt like there was something, like I was like, I'm doing the trauma work wrong, I'm doing my yoga training wrong, I'm doing sobriety wrong. And it's like, no, you weren't. You're just freaking autistic. That's all. You know? And like that's the liberation. So it turns from a fix it project to an acceptance project. And it's been amazing, I gotta say. Like, so from my experience, well, it's a bit disorienting. Obviously, I had to change the memoir and blah blah blah, and I'm still working on it, yada yada. You know, it's amazing to kind of, I now feel for the first time like I'm standing on the ground, and I never knew what that felt like. And I always, you know, I definitely was part of the postmodern condition. Oh, there's no true self, blah 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 blah. And now I'm like, yeah, guess what, there is. You know, and it's like, and it just, so it goes against all my fancy philosophy and it probably half of my PhD thesis and everything else, but it's like, but empiricism wins, right? So, you know, it's interesting. So that's been my, but it's, in terms of the writing though, Laura, it's taken me a long time, because I'm realizing how masked my writing has been to try to communicate outside of this very strange place. And I'm realizing I've been masking since I was born. So there is a lot of decoding of my own voice that I'm doing. I'm still, you know, I'm still working on it, to be perfectly honest with you. Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, like from my experience getting diagnosed at 39, and then even, you know, having long COVID and having that sort of affect my voice too. I enjoy the process of giving, you know, like pain or long COVID, like giving that a voice, because I think, you know, so often we're trained to, like, if we have something that's an element of, you know, our existence that we might judge, we so often see it as something we have to battle, right? It's either battle or masking. And so, I mean, it's been really interesting to me with pain to just sort of chart the relationship over time, if that makes sense. So it's not almost, yeah, I definitely, there's been like this narrative of like the way that Pain and I are pretty good roommates most of the time now. But at first it was just like agony, grief, anger, like intense. And so, yeah, I think, you know, in a way I'm it's been a great challenge. And I think it's, you know, hopefully, knock on wood, I hope that there's always stuff happening in my life that's challenging me and pushing new voices to the fore, because yeah, life has changed. You know, we can't help but have it affect us like over time. So I don't know what voices are going to come up next, but that's what I would, that's like what's been really helpful to me, is like just like sitting with the page and letting the thing, whatever it is, the new voice speak, asking it like what advice it has, like all kinds of exploratory writing, I think could be really fun.
That's great, Sonia. That's wonderful. I love that. And to be clear, what I was saying, I definitely think swings will come up and will challenge me still. It's just I actually feel like I found the ground, which is an amazing feeling when you've never been on the ground. So that the questions and concerns come from a place and I'm still like on the ground, but they come and they go. But I love what you said there, Sonia, because like the asking the voices and the exploratory, and I also hasten there because I remember we both were devoted to doing a long COVID PSA on this call, because both of us have had long. Actually, that's where we became. I remember. I mean, we knew of each other before, but we've been long COVID buddies, which is another thing I've been dealing with. And it's just there are so many things in the air. I forget to bring up all of them. But yeah, that's a whole other thing. And that's something, talk about something people want to sweep under the carpet and just pretend you don't exist. Oh my God, you know, and it's just like the only advantage we have is enough people have it, including male doctors, that like that people believe it exists, sort of, you know. But I hadn't thought about talking to long COVID. That I did in a way. It's when I started painting and stuff. Actually, the cover of my book, by the way, is a self-portrait. I painted this when I couldn't do words, and I just listened to long COVID, and long COVID was like, "You're not doing words." So I went and started painting again. So this is kind of cool that it ended up on the cover. That was not intentional. It just happened. So that's nice. And also there's a mask, which is ha ha ha. So many levels. Yeah. Yeah. Laura, does that answer your question sort of, or do you want to follow up with anything or?
There was like just a couple pieces in there that were just like nuggets, which I love, because there was like, yeah, like a nugget from you and a nugget from you, Julia, and a nugget from you, Sonia. So because I have both of those things going on. I have the one thing that I'm like, oh, this explains a lot. That's like the grounding piece. And then the other thing that I'm fighting and grieving and haven't accepted yet. And so it's like there's both of those. And it's like, it kind of makes me think about, yeah, what could I explore that's in that intersectional place too, of both of those things together. Yeah. So thank you.
And you know, that's what's so great about Sonia's book. If you haven't read it yet, because it's like, I know, well, Sonia, you can tell, but I'm assuming you'd be like, talk from both voices, you know, like, right? You can,
Definitely.
but I'll let you answer.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, I often will do the game of like, you know, see what my pain has to tell me about this other situation, right? Or since I've been with the pain for longer, in a way, it has completely shaped my worldview and how I might adapt to new challenges. So it's changed my personality in some ways. And yeah, I mean, so in my case, the pain helped me navigate long COVID so much more clearly, to the extent that like many of my friends who also happen to have long COVID, you know, we're going through that livid first scary grief, anger, and social isolation. And I was like, oh, and I was there right with them. But I was also like, oh, this is where we are. We're in the beginning, you know, and then around year 2, there's a transition point, you know, and then around year 3, you forget how it was before. Anyway, in some ways, I resist sort of narrativizing pain and other conditions, because, you know, everybody then wants you to have a happy ending, and often there isn't one. But at the same time, like the internal narrative of discovery for me has given me kind of like a guidebook. So I don't know, it could really be that the thing that you're discovering is also the thing that will be a guidebook to help you with the other thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it reminds me, Sonia, when you said that, you know, I got sober, alcoholic, and got sober when I was 23. So I've been at least 36 years sober next week, amazingly. And like, that's been such a huge, you know, and I take that for granted as this kind of way I do. There's a lot I'd have to do to stay that way. And then my yoga and my meditation, which are the two things that really came in to help with that. And also, actually, my meditation practice is how I got back to writing. And, you know, so all those things were in place so that when I got the shit hammer and my long COVID turned into a TIA and I ended up in the hospital and all the things, you know, it's like I knew, I was like, okay, now we're going to go do the trauma work, because this is, you know, some of this is a sympathetic nervous system thing. And, you know, and I knew to do that, you know, so it was like you, it's like I just had this sort of, I wouldn't say glide path. I was terrified most of the time, to be perfectly honest with you. It did not feel like a glide path, but I did have like, oh, there's this thing and that thing and the other thing. And had I not had all those previous experiences and dealing with all that, and I had just gotten hammered with it out of nowhere, which some people have, I'd feel much more helpless, because I had places to go, like recovery meetings, and places to bitch about it, and places to talk, and I had, you know, communities like involved. You know, I just did all the things I knew to do. Go find the other people, go find a community, talk about it. Oh my God, you know, and like, you know, get resource ourselves, because nobody else is going to do it. We already know that, you know, and it's just like all this stuff that you just know automatically. Yeah, that's really
Totally.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
A crash landing path, I guess, as opposed to a glide
Crash
path,
landing,
right?
exactly right. Not a guide path. Like, oh, I've crash landed before. I think I know how to do this. Like, you know, we could probably not die. Maybe.
Don't tense up. Just go soft when you fall.
Go soft. No, but seriously, though, like, you laugh, but honestly, like, it is sort of like that. It's just like, okay, man, got to bring in the super acceptance power, you know, try to soften, because honestly, like, that's the thing I've learned, is acceptance is the key. You know, it's a bit of a cliche in 12-step programs, but it's actually true. It's like, it doesn't mean I have to like a thing. It doesn't mean anything, but it means I have to accept it's real. And it's like, if I start from there, I can then go do the other things. But it sounds to me, Laura, like what you're right. You know, there's a lot of, I know it's the last thing you want to hear probably, but there's a lot of rich stuff in there. You know, I think you're a writer, so hopefully you won't take that wrong. You know, like, I think there's a lot in there.
But I wanted to write beachy novels. No,
Oh, well, you can write
I'm
like
just-
really disconcerting
kidding.
beachy novels.
Yeah, yeah. Dystopian.
Actually, that's the beachy novel I want to read, right?
Totally. I would actually read that beach. No, you're right. That's it. Pain
Oh, I
Woman
also
goes
wanted
to the
to-
beach.
I also wanted to I wanted to say two other things really quick too. One about children's voice again, that I remember reading Ellen Foster by Kay Gibbons years ago, and that was the first time I read an entire, well, it's a thin book, it's a small book, but I read the entire book is in child voice, and I was like just astounded because it was so captivating, and I was like, that, like the fact that that carried the book from first page to last page. So is really good, just if anyone wants to see another example of really good child voice. And then the other thing I was going to say, Sonya, about writing what people, what did you say? You said something before that just made me want to say that you're writing about, when you write about pain, and when you have done that, my sister is a huge fan and was so grateful to read your work.
Oh,
So
thank you.
yeah, so it really resonated with her and what she's living with. And so, yeah, there's always that, that some people are gonna want to invisibilize you, but then other people, it's like, yeah, it really made a big difference for her to read her story-ish in your story. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for telling me that. And tell your sister I said hi.
Okay.
And that's great. And that's why I always say to people, like, in my writing, people in my writing workshops and other, it's just like, that's why you tell your story, because there's always going to be someone, and it's got to be yours, and it's got to be your version of it, because that's the way it's going to get across. And it might not be a bestseller, but that doesn't mean there aren't people that need to hear it, and it might be a bestseller too. I'm not saying it can't be, but I'm just saying, like, to go for that versus going for what is true to you and your experience in all of its complexity, whether or not there's a happy ending. Oh, believe me, I know that one, or not, it's like, then it gives that voice. And I remember, I know people find him problematic, but I'm still love David Foster Wallace and fight me, but
Me too.
but that thing about, he said, why do people raise, like, so people don't have to be so fucking lonely, it's like, so people can hear, them. So I love that. I thought that was beautiful. But Robin, it looks like, do you have a question? You unmuted yourself. Is that time for a quick one?
Yeah, real
Oh.
quick. I want to know, which book was it in which you wrote about pain?
That is it's called Pain Woman Takes Your Keys.
Okay.
I actually sent that to you, Robin.
Oh, you didn't send me the book.
I didn't? I thought I did. Oh, okay, never mind.
No.
I thought I did.
I'm the mommy that she
Yes.
referred to. Mommy.
Who bravely shows up for these things anyway. God bless you. But yeah. So yeah.
So I would love.
Okay.
Could you put that in the notes or
Yeah.
in the chat, or could
Mhm.
somebody? Because I really want to get that, Sonia.
Oh, cool.
I also live with pain 24/7 and have for 20 years, and I have chronic fatigue. So
Oh, gosh.
what happens is I have these short bursts of energy in which people come at me as though I'm just fine. You're just so fine. And what they don't realize is that I can do that for an hour or two, maybe an hour mostly, and then I crash out. I totally crash out.
Oh my gosh, that is exactly my experience. Is like, I was trying to tell someone, like, that my sense of what time is very different now, because I have the same thing, like bursts where I can do things and then flat, and then a burst and then flat. It's like, time is bumpy.
Which is what long COVID does too. And as Robin knows, and I think I said to you, Sonia, I don't have it as badly now as I did for a while, but when I did have it, really the real super fatigue, I was like, I remember getting in touch with Robin and other people I knew had chronic fatigue. I'm like, now I get it. Now I understand what you're dealing with, because it's so weird. I mean, that's the only word I can come up with. It's really brilliant, I know, but like, because you're just like, now I can't. I mean, it's just so totalizing. And one of the things I'm hoping with long COVID is, because so many people have it, that it's going to help the chronic fatigue community and the fibro community, since it's tipping so many people into that world. So yeah.
Good luck. All right.
I know.
Thank you, Sonia. I'll go back on mute.
Okay. That's my attempt to drag a positive out of whatever. So I don't know how long Sonia is here, but if anyone else want to say something while we're all here together. And by the way, I am recording this, so it'll be on my YouTube channel. So if you forget something or you want to go back and hear something, you can do that easily. Okay. Well, given what we said about energy, I don't want to take too much of yours. I know you've got a lot on right now. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
You're muted.
So
just
much,
no, you
Julia.
unmuted.
It was really wonderful to just get to celebrate your book and to see faces of some folks who it's lovely to see, and see new folks. So thanks very much for the conversation. Yeah. And thanks for your book too. And I just, again, can't emphasize enough how much to, if anyone's a writer here, go get her book. If you haven't gotten mine, for God's sakes, get it. What are you thinking? And write a review about it on Amazon or somewhere, please. Okay, sorry, I'm going to stop that. All right, so thank you, Sonia, and as always, and great to see you, and I'm sure we'll see each other soon.